You touched on those voters who have yet to make up their mind. How many of those voters are there as we sit here just 3 weeks away from Election Day? And is that number higher than you would expect? Is it unprecedented? What does that look like when you compare it to elections past?
It's about 14% where we stand today. So these are all the swing voters in the system, and roughly about 10% of voters in each of the party within each of the parties say that they can still change their mind. This is roughly tracking with what we've seen in previous elections. And then in terms of the undecideds, that's where the undecideds have come down fairly significantly since the last time you and I spoke. The last time there was about 10%, maybe even more, 12% that were undecided. And now the number has been cut in half to about 6%. But the important point here is that there's enough voters that are undecided that can tip the scales for the election. So the last 20, 25 days, it's very important. And it will be very important for both of the campaigns to close strong.
And if you're an undecided, are you deciding between Trump and Harris? Are you deciding between one of the candidates and the couch? Are you deciding between Trump and Harris and a third party candidate? What does that decision making process look like?
Well, it seems like they're deciding between the two candidates, right? And what we're seeing in the data is that while this election might not be as high turnout as 2020, which was a very high turnout election, it's still very high turnout overall. So 90% of all registered voters are saying that they're definitely going to vote or they're probably going to vote. And the definite number is about 81% of voters. That is 85% of Democrats, 84% of Republicans, and about 72% of independents. And then those who are probable are about 10% for each of the parties. So these are not the couch potato voters. You make a great point that historically Trump has been able to pull new voters into the voting pool. Traditionally, those are not the kind of voters that take surveys. So that could be a wild card in the election. But at the same time, also new voters, young voters that are voting for the first time. Those are also voters that are not likely to take polls on the regular, and they could be the wild card too. So it's an open election. There's many factors that can influence it one way or another.
You and I now for months have been talking about the independent voter. And as these numbers suggest now, Trump has a real advantage with these independent voters in the battleground states. Can you give us a clearer picture here?
Absolutely. So Trump is up 4 to 5 points with independent voters in battleground states, 44% and change to Harris is 40%. Importantly, 16% of independents in battleground states are still on the fence. These are voters who are unsure that they're going to vote for. So that's 3 times higher than the national average, again, for independents in battleground states. And as we said, this is very, very likely to make the difference in the election. Otherwise, the candidates, they're really tracking as you would expect them. You know, Trump is up about 13 points with men in these battleground states. Harris is up about 9 points with women. And the picture amongst voters in terms of Harris winning the lower income voters and is the same. They're tied actually for higher educated, higher income voters, 49% to 49. And then Trump is still winning those middle class voters, 51% to 43%. But as I said again, the amount of undecideds is still very high, even in the battleground states. And you know, we ran a series of questions, which I'll get into in a second, around character attributes and how the candidates are doing with voters in the final stretch. And one of the things that's very poignant is that Harris does well on the question of who relates to the voting class. she's more relatable to the working class, rather than the voting class, working class, than Trump is. So she's at about 51%. He's at about 40%. So again, when it comes to those undecideds and those swing voters, it could still go either way.